what's the biggest threat? The biggest threat is quantum. So, Bitcoin's value proposition is digital gold, something you can, potentially pass on to your kids and their grandchildren. And no one has a goddamn clue on, number one, China's quantum initiatives and timeline. They're outspending the US 100 to 1, which is what they're disclosing publicly, which means it could be 10,000 to 1. And they have, Google-sized campuses specifically dedicated to quantum technologies. So the underlying encryption mechanisms that ECSDA and that basically secure Bitcoin wallets, Bitcoin addresses on Bitcoin, also Ethereum, can be compromised, and as little as what analysis is that BTQ is partially funding in the span of the next 1 to 2, 3 years. So if you're holding Bitcoin as a speculative asset that you can hold for generational wealth, I think people are going to be in for kind of a day of reckoning when the speculative narrative that has been the main driver for the appreciation of Bitcoin actually flips, and the underlying security premise of this whole cryptographic, whatever, $3-4 trillion market asset class gets destroyed.
So let me stop you there. I'm going to ask you to restate what you've said. I'm going to try and repeat it to make sure I understand, because I don't have nearly the brain capacity you have to understand crypto and the quantum cryptography that we're discussing. But did I just hear you correctly say that whether it's governments or other sources are figuring out how to crack into our crypto wallets using quantum computing? Is that essentially what you just said?
Absolutely. I mean, in my early 20s, I lived in mainland China, and I lived in a pre and post capital control environment in China. So before capital controls were put in place, Chinese were buying everything from soccer teams in the United Kingdom to the plaza to the hotels in Paris. There were companies like Onbong, Fosun were on global shopping sprees, and then capital controls came into place. One of the threats to Chinese capital controls was money leaving through Bitcoin, right? And so I think as you see kind of the currency fight, before Trump got elected, there was this whole notion of BRIC-related petrodollars, Saudi, Russia, China coming together to enforce kind of a global currency based on commodities. Then Trump has basically utilized very effectively stable coins to prolong and accommodate US dollar domination essentially in a digital format. But that digital format essentially comes at a price, which is the underlying security. And so last week, or only 4 or 5 days ago, the US government, the SEC, put out a post-quantum financial framework guideline where we were one of 4 companies, or not 4 companies, for basically the World Economic Forum, the Bank of International Settlements, which dictates all monetary policy for central banks, and BTQ Technologies were referenced as part of this SEC initiative that just states that, hey, essentially all digital assets are fucked. The traditional financial system is completely screwed, and excuse my language, but I think it requires kind of a bit of a sense of urgency in terms of kind of where things are headed and the lack of preparedness for what we're facing when you have global regulators, for instance, allowing retail and institutions to buy ETFs that aren't secure from a security perspective.
So what we're talking about here is the ability for nefarious actors, whomever they might be. I mean, the North Koreans have already done this.
Absolutely.
To break into crypto wallets.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you say is that can happen. It's going to be much easier to do with quantum computing in the next year. It seems like it's already happening. And how will quantum computing protect me then in the future?
So, I mean, there's a lot of advancements in terms of quantum computing. I think we're going to see kind of a paradigm shift in terms of, the notion of what Bitcoin has created in terms of systematic value is what, drawed me to Bitcoin some, around 2010 was this notion of, decentralized. But the whole premise of Bitcoin as a sense of security was its cryptographic infrastructure. Now that, quantum is coming of age, that is completely compromised. So I think digital scarcity, innovation associated with cryptographic infrastructure, is extremely important. But I think we're going to see kind of the likes of, Bitcoin, if they can't adapt. We've proposed solutions. Right now, Bitcoin uses proof of work to secure kind of the production of new Bitcoin emission schedules. We've proposed quantum proof of work, which uses a boson sampler, which is a quantum device that emits quantum effect. It's 99.9% more energy efficient than existing ASIC technologies, hardware technologies, and enables quantum security within the chain. The problem with Bitcoin is achieving consensus amongst all of these players who have different foundational economic interests now. It wasn't, the Bitcoin I discovered in 2010 when there was, 10 people in a room deciding the outlook of Bitcoin. There's government.
But how would you describe?
Yeah.
How would you describe? I'm a Luddite. How would you describe what we're talking about to a Luddite? What in simple, language, normal query language.
Sure.
What are we talking about here?
So we're talking about. So what I kind of begun with is that it's not always kind of there's kind of a saying where the first pig to the race gets slaughtered or something along the lines of that nature, or technologies that come to the market often prove a point, but people build on top of them. And what I'm seeing right now is that the world is not prepared for a quantum world. But I think that there's essentially very interesting economic attributes to Bitcoin-like networks, which we will see designed and introduced in quantum formats. So I think Bitcoin is just scratching the surface in terms of what's possible for future paradigms of digitally scarce quantum-based money supplies, which we will be introducing at BTQ. And then
you're going to introduce
correct.
And so this term quantum, is it a threat or is it a security? Which is it? I mean, when I say security,
if you're a holder of Bitcoin, for instance, right? Quantum is a threat because Bitcoin, first of all, is a very speculative asset class, right? And the one of the main characteristics of value for Bitcoin is its encryption standards and the way the programmatic design of the protocol works. That is all compromised by quantum computing. So the value there is, okay, things can be kind of compromised, and Bitcoin has a very convoluted, I would say, like I said earlier, when I first got into Bitcoin, there was maybe 10, 20 people involved in the space. Now there's tens of hundreds of thousands of people, investment banks, a lot of people that are, I would say, the original 10, 20 people I interfaced with in the space were anarchists. They were, firm believers, anti-government, and they had these very strong libertarian views. Now there's a lot of other people with economic interests at play in this whole kind of complexity of what is this kind of Bitcoin digital asset class evolution, but no one's looking fundamentally under the hood of what will make it secure for decades to come. So I think there's a fundamental flaw in the whole space as a whole, for instance.
And once quantum computers reach sufficient scale,
correct,
then cryptocurrencies that don't update to quantum style cryptography are at risk. So, two questions for you. How long till the computers are at scale, and which currencies are at risk? Are you saying Bitcoin and everyone else is at risk right now, or aren't they already working to upgrade the systems to quantum cryptography?
Bitcoin has a very hard. You have, Bitcoin core contributors or people very big in Bitcoin. They don't believe that quantum exists, for instance, right? Ethereum is taking a more, I would say, kind of aggressive stance, but there's a huge discrepancy between quantum physicists, quantum cryptographers, and like a standardized blockchain cryptographer. They don't understand quantum physics. And there's maybe, I would say, 50 to 100 quantum physicists who can work in commercial settings and or applications. A lot of them, I would say 1/3 of them, work and interface with BTQ. But there's, if you've spent the last decade plus on Bitcoin, do you really want to bring up, and your monetary kind of, your financial freedom is secured to this asset class? Do you want to shed a light on the fact that it's completely compromised or potentially completely compromised, right? So there's a huge economic conflict of interest that is bubbling up to the surface. And I think the biggest thing, and what I've been pushing for and what I've been telling people is, the National Institute of Science and Technology in the United States first standardized post-quantum encryption algorithms, a set of post-quantum encryption algorithms, the August before last. So they've been introduced for roughly a year. And I've been telling people there's only a matter of time between when NIST and the SEC start talking and say, hey, can we really allow Bitcoin, Solana, Ethereum ETFs to exist when we can't actually fundamentally secure or have a designation of security around the public key cryptography that powers these coins? How is that relevant, or how is that a responsible thing to allow retail and institutional investors to get exposure to?
So again, as a Luddite who does not know one thing about much of what we're discussing, I have a maybe 10% comprehension of what you're warning us about. I thought the blockchain technology was sufficient to protect the cryptocurrency exchanges as well as the records of your transactions and of essentially your wallet.
No, not at all in a quantum world or in a pre-quantum world. So there's this whole concept of harvest now, decrypt later. So as you mentioned earlier, North Koreans are definitely indexing everything online possible in terms of wallet addresses, keys, exchange wallets, cold wallets, so that when potentially they have access to a quantum computer, quantum software, they can hack or socially engineer everything that's being exposed publicly as of now. So even before quantum computers will exist, there's this massive risk before that, which this SEC paper addresses in order of magnitude as how big of a threat this currently is, that is just going completely unnoticed by most.
This was a paper, SEC paper that came out last year, you said?
No, this was 5 or 6 days ago, last Thursday.
Do you offhand know the title of that paper? I'd love to look that up.
Yes, it is called, they introduced something called the PQFIF, which stands for Post-Quantum Financial Infrastructure Framework.
Okay. So if you were going to write this story, what's the headline and what's the most crucial thing that the people who are watching our video should know?
Well, essentially, quantum computing, I think, is, I like to kind of predicate it on an example that I've experienced and witnessed in the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years. So, for even 3-4 years ago, when me and my friends were talking about artificial intelligence, there was I'd invested in a few companies that were doing natural language processing for equity trading, crypto trading, and things like that. But for the Luddite, as you like to kind of reference them to, if you talk to most people about AI, like the only thing people knew was like IBM Watson, which was a big black box being developed that did some stuff with AI, or these people playing Go in Korea and Japan against like Google DeepMind research. Like that was really all there was that was being kind of popularized about artificial intelligence. No one gave a shit about AI. Like if someone sent me like an AI pitch deck for a technology company, I wasn't necessarily interested. Because it just wasn't, it didn't reach that kind of, escape velocity that, essentially Chat GPT, made it use. Like, my wife uses Chat GPT for, every other, question she has and receives this kind of, well annotated, instruction manual for whatever she needs. And that's completely, shifted the paradigm. Quantum physics, the extrapolation of quantum physics into quantum computing and encryption is, I think, an order of magnitude, so much more significant than artificial intelligence, in terms of, what will be enabled by these applications. So quantum computers, quantum encryption are going to be weaponized, right? So that's one thing you need to understand, is that the timelines are not public, because it's under the wraps of sophisticated government agencies who are not going to tell you how fast they will have achieved quantum supremacy and or encryption capabilities, because that is, national security compromisation. And then there's public aspects towards, how to protect financial infrastructure such as crypto assets, which are being developed, and we're working on solutions that can protect, for instance, your stablecoin transactions through our product QSSN, which is the first kind of quantum security standard for stablecoin, an initiative that has been put into legislation in large digital asset markets such as Korea. So it's mandated by law in the Korean marketplace.
This is something that BTQ.
This is one of BTQ's products. So we're actively working on finding solutions for existing cryptographic infrastructure today. And the digital asset marketplace, given my background in the space, is a natural kind of battleground for us to test and make sure that financial infrastructures are safe globally, to have operational efficiency, but also a large part of it is for us to educate regulators and say, hey, to, the Bank of International Settlements, where I've, been for the last, 3-4 years at their post-quantum kind of sandbox workshops. It's like, hey, global money is going to go from printing presses to digitization. And those digital dollars need to be quantum secure. But it's not simply kind of like a line of code. Just like Bitcoin takes computational power to create Bitcoin, you need actually hardware implementations of these things, because, the size of a post-quantum encryption algorithm is massive. So it takes hardware acceleration to actually perform. For me to send you a tether or a $1 in a digital format on a blockchain, and for that signature to be post-quantum secure, you need hardware running in the background, which takes data centers. The headline is there will be massive volatility for digital assets, traditional finance, inflections of sovereign countries trying to, create their own fiat dominance in the form of digitization of dollars. And then this whole, quantum wave that supersedes that, which I think, will burn, potentially Bitcoin, and other, blockchains to the ground, potentially. But from that, from the ashes of all of this, we will develop much more sophisticated, quantum-based digital assets that will have, long-lasting value and implications. And I think we're reaching a very exciting time and experimentation time into the future, but specifically towards kind of Bitcoin digital assets. Like people just aren't pricing in the fact that all of these things are speculative, and the number one, the number one driver of value towards Bitcoin, for instance, has been the sophistication of its technology and encryption, underlying encryption. But that's all potentially compromised within a year or two. So when does that volatility and speculation flip towards the other side and make people realize, hey, these systems weren't built for a quantum world? And I think as more, and like you said, I mean, quantum physics is one of the most intricate topics you could potentially study, because it involves, not talking, religions or anything of that nature, but, there's quantum physics, can be attributed to, kind of the creation of specific kind of forms of things we see in nature. I'll leave it at that. And the, rationalizing that, abstracting that into developing computational frameworks that accelerate information applications is going to, change the worlds we live in. But I think, abstracting that and then saying, this whole digital currency narrative, the digitization of traditional finance onto kind of blockchains, I think will all be leapfrogged by quantum technology sooner than people can expect.